Hello friends, welcome to part 4 of this video series. In this video, I will explain about the two deployment strategies of Infoblox DDI appliance in detail. I will also explain about the high availability concept supported by Infoblox. Finally, I will show you how to set up a grid and how to join an appliance to an existing grid. And I will also show you how to configure two appliances in an HA. So let's get started. The first deployment strategy is standalone deployment. Let me show you how a standalone appliance looks like. So let's navigate to the Chrome. So this is the UI of a standalone appliance. As you can see, it is almost similar to the UI of the grid. The only difference here is that instead of the grid tab, the system tab is showing up in here. So let me talk about some of the properties of a standalone deployment. I would say this is like a default mode. That is when you when you take a physical appliance for the first time, by default it will be in the standalone or in the system mode till you install a grid license. So that means any appliance without a grid license will be in a standalone mode or in a system mode. In this standalone mode, there will be only one appliance or two in case of an HA. I will be explaining HA in detail towards the end of this video. For the time being, think of HA as two appliances working like a single appliance. So network services like DNS, DHCP would be running in a single appliance in standalone deployment. This deployment strategy is suited for small offices which has limited number of DNS zones and DHCP network. From an operational perspective, there is no difference other than the fact that in standalone, there is only one single appliance, whereas in grid, multiple appliances can be present and the network services like DNS and DHCP can be distributed among the different appliances / members of that grid. So being said that, let's talk about the second deployment strategy. That's the grid. Let me get back to my slide. So what is grid? Grid is a collection of one or more Infoblox appliance managed by a grid master. The grid master is the first appliance in the grid. An important property or feature of the grid master is that the grid master database has all the information contained in all of its grid members database. The next is grid master candidate. Grid master candidate is a member of the grid which has the exact same copy as that of the grid master's database. It can be used or it can be promoted to grid master in case the grid master fails. So now being said that, let me talk about some of the advantages of setting up a grid. The first advantage is that you can have a centralized management of all the devices that you are adding onto that grid. The second advantage is that, let's say if one of the appliances in the grid fails, since grid master, that is, as I've explained in point number 2, since grid master has a copy of database of all its members, even if a particular member fails, that appliance can be replaced by a new appliance and the grid master will sync the data or the information that was contained in that failed appliance to this new appliance. So that way, as soon as the new appliance or the replaced appliance is joined to the grid, it can take or it can start serving the network services that was associated to that appliance or to that member. Now, the next is about the communication. So all communication between the grid master and the grid member happen through an encrypted VPN tunnel. So the data or all the information that flows between the grid master and the members pass through this encrypted VPN tunnel. That way the data is secure. Now, even before a tunnel is set up, the first step is for a member or for an appliance to join a particular grid is that it has to from the appliance perspective, we have to input some informations like the grid name, the grid master's IP address, and a shared secret. And after entering these details are sent to the grid master, and the grid masters checks if those details are valid, and it also checks the authentication details, and if the authentication passes, or if the and this process is known as the challenge response authentication mechanism, and the source and the destination port used for this traffic is 2114. If the CRM handshake is successful, the master tells the member which port number to use when building the subsequent VPN tunnel. By default, the port that is used for VPN tunneling is UDP port 1194. But this is configurable from the grid. So this is a simple grid architecture. So here you can see a grid master candidate, and two members, and one of the member is in HA. I will come back to the slide after I explain to you about HA, but for the time being, this is a simple grid architecture. So now what I'm going to show is, I'm going to show you how to add an appliance as a member to an existing grid. So let's get to Chrome. So the one that I showed you here, the first thing is actually a standalone deployment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this into a grid by adding a grid license, and then I'm going to add this Infoblox 4 into this grid, that is Infoblox 1. So let me start by adding the grid license. So this is the CLI of the Infoblox system that I showed you. So that is this one. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to input a temporary license. So 7. Okay, so that's done. So now let's get back here. Close this out. As you can see now the system manager has changed to a grid manager, because right now this has been converted to a grid with just the grid master, because the first appliance in the grid is the grid master. So this is an independent grid right now with just one appliance, and since this is the first appliance, so this itself is a grid master. But now what we have to do is we have to join this appliance, that is which has the IP address 192.168.0.110 into this grid. So let me show you how that's done. So the first step is by letting or by telling this grid master that that a new appliance is will be joining to this particular grid. So what we have to do is we have to create that member in here so that the grid master will be able to recognize when the traffic from that member or from a request from that member comes into this grid, asking or requesting to join this particular grid. So how we are going to do it? By going to grid manager tab, going to members tab, just click on this plus, and you can see there is a member type, and it has two options values, Infoblox or virtual NIOS. So depending on the hardware type of your whether it's a virtual appliance or a physical appliance, you have to select accordingly. If it's a physical appliance, then you have to select Infoblox, and if it's a virtual appliance, then you have to select virtual NIOS. In my case, mine is a virtual appliance, so that's why I'm selecting virtual NIOS. So let me give the name Infoblox dot look, and this is the option where I can select master candidate. So if I check this flag, then the grid master and this grid master candidates or this appliance database will be exactly the same. But for the time being, I'm just leaving it unchecked and making it as a member. So let me give next. Okay, so this is where I have to give the IP address of the member. So 192.168.0.10 subnet mask is. Okay, so I have defined the IP, the subnet mask, and the gateway, and I'm not giving any extensible attribute. Okay, so now I have defined that, or I have explicitly told the grid master that a member will be requesting, or an appliance will be requesting to join this grid with this IP address. So now what we have to do is we have to make that request from the member side or from the other appliance side. So for that we need three pieces of information. The first one is the IP address of the grid master, which we already know, that is 192.168.0.53. The second information is the grid name. So I'll tell you how to find the grid name. So we have to go to grid properties, and that's where, and this is our grid name, and then we have a shared secret. So what I've done is I have kept the shared secret as my name, that is Maheshwar. So now I'll show you how to from the member or from the appliance from which I want to add, or appliance from which I need to request to be request to join that grid. I'll show you how that is done. So there are two ways in which you can join the grid. One is through the UI. So from the UI, what you need to do is go to grid manager, and in here on the toolbar there is an option to join the grid. So here we have to give the virtual IP address, the grid name, and the shared secret. So this is one way of doing it, and the other way is what I'm going to do right now, that is from the CLI. So the command to do that is set membership, and I have to give the IP address of my grid master, that is 192.168.0.53. The grid name is Infoblox, so I'm not going to change that, and this shared secret is, like I said, it's set to my name. Okay, so I'm just giving confirmation. Okay, so now if we go to the grid master, so we will be able to see the status changing from offline to connecting. So this may take up to 5 minutes or so. And since right now it's a new my grid master and the member is exactly on the same NIOS version, so the joining will not take that much time. But if the two appliances are in completely different NIOS version, then it will have to first sync their NIOS version and then sync their database. So that would take like more time, anything between 30 minutes to an hour. But right now, since in this is a new member which is absolutely a blank database, as well as the NIOS version is also the same, so it has already joined. So let's confirm that here. Now as you can see, my grid member is connected and everything is good now. So this is how you join a member to a grid. So let's get back to the slide. Okay, so now the next concept is, or the next topic is high availability, or in short, HA. So Infoblox support two appliances to be configured in HA mode for redundancy. HA is supported in both standalone and grid deployments. That means I can, at the start of the video, I showed you a standalone appliance. So then I told you in standalone, I can have only one appliance or two in case of an HA. So I could have made my standalone appliance or the standalone system into an HA pair. Even though I'm adding one more appliance, it is only for redundancy. From an operation point of view, it is still considered as a single appliance. Then the two nodes participating in HA will be in active passive mode. Only the active node will be handling the DNS and DHCP request. So just like I've explained, even though we have two appliances, only one of them will be working. So the active one will be the appliance that will be working, and the passive one will just remain silent. And but these two will be in sync. So all the data that is contained in active will be synced with the passive. I will explain to you how the sync happens in a minute. So yeah, so again, the next is the interfaces that will be used for HA, for configuring HA. So Infoblox has four interfaces: management interface, LAN 1 interface, HA interface, and LAN 2 interface. Out of these four, the interfaces HA and LAN 1 of the Infoblox appliance will be used in HA. Now, the next point, the virtual IP or the VIP gets mapped. So whenever we are using an HA, there is a concept of virtual IP address. So this virtual IP address gets mapped to the HA interface of the active node of that HA or the HA pair. Similarly, there is a virtual MAC which gets binded to the HA interface of the active node of that corresponding HA pair. Now, like I said before, the active nodes and passive nodes DB is always in sync. This is achieved through a mechanism called block sync. The data is exchanged through an encrypted VPN tunnel created between the active and passive node. And the image that you are seeing shows how the block sync happens and how the data between active and passive nodes are always in sync. Okay, so now you must be thinking, okay, so we have two appliances configured in HA. So now, how is it how is it really useful? So that's what this slide explains. So this slide explains, so as you can see, we have two nodes, node 1 and node 2. And then initially when we start, the node 1 is active node and the node 2 is passive. So the active node sends VRRP advertisements to the passive node every second. Now, VRRP stands for Virtual Router Redundancy Protocol, and these VRRP advertisements are multicast in nature. Okay, so now there is another concept that needs to be understood here is about the VRID, Virtual Router ID. So when I'll be showing you how HA is configured, I will be explaining more on that. But right now, think as virtual VRID as a ID that needs to be unique. So every HA pair is associated with a VRID. The two nodes in the HA pair includes the VRID in all the VRRP advertisements that it sends, and it is used to recognize the VRRP advertisements intended for themselves. Only appliances on the same subnet configured with the same VRID responds to these advertisements. So now I will explain what that means. Every second, the active node of the HA sends VRRP advertisements to the passive node. And how the passive node is able to understand this, these are the VRRP message sent by the active, is by using by checking if that VRID is present. So that's what that VRID is important, and that's why it has to be unique. So now, if passive node misses 3 consecutive VRRP advertisements, or VRRP advertisement is, think of it like a heartbeat message, like a heartbeat message that active sends to passive, telling the passive that the active is still up and running. So let's say the passive node misses 3 continuous heartbeat message or VRRP messages. The passive node assumes that the active is down, and it will transition itself to active. So that's what you are able to see in the second on the image on the right. So after an HA failover, let's say this node 1, which was initially active, goes down. So at that time, the node 2 will not be receiving VRRP advertisement, and it thinks that, or it assumes that the node has gone down, and it transitions itself to an active state. So now when it transitions itself to an active state, the virtual IP address and the virtual MAC, which was earlier associated with the HA port of node 1, is now bound to the HA port of node 2, which is our current active. So that's how the redundancy, we are able to achieve redundancy. That is, even if one of them fails, immediately the second or the passive one will transition to active, and then all the network services will be served from the node 2, which is our current active. Okay, so this is about, so this, whatever I've explained right now, is only a portion of the things that there to learn in high availability, because high availability is a really complex topic, and there are multiple complex scenarios where, let's say both active and passive node is up, and if in case the connectivity between them is broken, so passive will not be getting any VRRP advertisements. So at that time, what passive assumes that the active is down, but actually it's not. It's just that the connectivity between these two are down. So in that case, they're both node 1 and node 2 will be in active state. That's called a dual active condition. So at that time, the 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 virtual IP address and the virtual MAC keeps switching between the HA port of both node 1 and node 2. So at that time, we will be seeing a lot of inconsistencies and accessing the UI, or accessing the services. So there are a lot of complex scenarios associated with HA. But for this video, for the scope of this video, I am not covering that because that's not the purpose. Because we are not troubleshooting the issues associated with HA. I'm just giving you a high level understanding of what HA is, how it has been implemented in Infoblox, and I'll also show you how HA can be configured from Infoblox. I hope the theory part is clear now. So let's jump into our Infoblox UI and I'll show you how to set it up. So yeah, okay. But before I go ahead and set it up, in my home lab environment, I have only 2 appliances. So what I need to do is I have to break or delete this member, and I need to use the same member or the same appliance to join as a HA pair. So for that, what I'll do is I will delete it. So deletion is very straightforward. If you are logged in as a super user, just select that member and click on that delete icon and just click yes. Okay, so once you have deleted, it is for, and that particular member will be literally useless unless you reset the database, because as of now this appliance is configured as a member of this grid, but from the grid master this member has been kicked out. So that means now this is in a useless state, or this member cannot be used unless I reset the database. And so that's what I'm going to do. So the command is reset database. Okay, so let this happen. In the meantime, so it will take around 2 minutes, so 2 to 3 minutes for that reset database to be completed. In the meantime, I will show you how to configure this grid master, which is currently a standalone grid master, to an HA pair. For that, we have to come again, we have to be in grid manager, members, and select that particular so this need not be grid master. This is applicable to any appliance. The how it is done, it's exactly the same, but since I have only one appliance, which is the grid master, that's why I'm showing it in using, or I'm showing you how to configure in the grid master. So just select that grid master or any appliance which you want to configure as HA, go to edit, go to network tab, and this is where I have to specify the high availability pair option. Okay, so this was the virtual router ID I was talking when I was explaining the theory. So it has to be a unique value, like it's that like this prompt saying, or this message that's being shown. And let's say, and since this is the first HA that I'm going to configure, it doesn't matter whichever value I use, because I know it's this is the first HA. But if you are if you are having a complex environment, you need to or a very big grid with a number of HAs, then you need to make sure that if you are adding a new HA, the value that you are the router ID has to be unique. Okay, so I have set it as 5. Okay, so now this is where like I said, for HA or for high availability, we are using 2 interface, the LAN 1 interface and the HA interface. And you can also see VIP. So this, as I explained before, this is a virtual IP address. And right now, if you see, initially this 192.168.0.53 was my LAN 1 IP address. So now, if I'm changing to, or if I'm converting this standalone grid master to an HA, so it all my network services, or everything will now be pointed to my VIP. So that's why uh, I have, automatically this Infoblox takes up the LAN 1 IP address and place it onto the VIP, so that I don't have to make any changes in the DNS, or or even if I'm accessing directly through the IP address, then I, there won't be any issues. Okay, so now being said that, out of the other four IP address, one of the IP address I have to specify the same IP address that my grid, the other appliance, or the appliance which I am planning to make it the HA, the passive node of this HA pair. So I already know the IP address, so let me put it here: 192.168.0.110. And the other three IP address, the only condition is that it has to be on the same network. I'm in a 192.168.0.0/24 network. So let me put 192.168.0.86, 87, and 88. Okay. So now I've set the virtual router ID and I've configured the four IP address. And the important thing is that the virtual IP address, if you are transitioning it for the first time, then the LAN 1's IP address will be automatically taken by the virtual, the VIP, and the node 2 LAN 1 IP address has to be exactly the same IP address as that of uh, the appliance, as that of my appliance IP. So that means here, so this is the appliance that I'm planning to join. So this is 192.168.0.110. So that's what I'm giving it in here as node to LAN 1 IP address. So now I'm saving and closing, and I'm getting a warning message that now after I do it, now all my, so whatever was what all network service was earlier listening to the LAN 1 interface is now will be listening to the VIP IP address. Okay, so now let it, so it, that system will do a restart, so that's why we lost access to the UI. So let that take a restart. In the meantime, let's configure this appliance to join as the passive node of the HA. Again, the joining process is exactly the same as that of joining a member to the grid. So we are using set membership, and we have to give the VIP IP address. Now that is 192.168.0.53. The name is Infoblox and the shared secret is sure. Yes, yes. Okay. So now this will take, so this will do a restart, and after that it will try to contact the grid master on that IP address 192.168.0.53. So let's see what is the status here. Let me check if that So let me check if after the restart the appliance is back. Okay, so now we should be able to. Okay, so it's starting up. Okay, so let's log in. In the meantime, let's see what is the status of. Okay, so as you can see, it has contacted the so these are the logs from the member or from the other appliance uh, which I'll be making the passive node of my HA pair. So as you can see, it has contacted the grid master. It has synchronized the database with the grid master, and it has got all the settings, and now it is doing a restart. And after the restart is complete, then we would be seeing that the HA pair is or the HA pair has been configured. So now let's go to our UI. And so this is the grid master. So let me log in again. So if I go to grid, okay, so the reason it's still showing error is because that process is not complete. So we will just wait for it to get back. As you can see, it's not complete yet. So only after the restart happens, then the appliance would join that grid as the passive node. So it might take up to 2 to 3 minutes. So yes, the restart is complete. So let's talk. Okay. Okay, so now you can see the completed database sync with the grid master. So it's still okay. Command M. Okay, so now the status is showing as passive. So now if I go to the UI of the grid master, now if I go to grid, see the HA pair is complete, or that HA pair has been configured. So this is how you need to configure an HA pair. So now the last topic in this video is to how to convert or how to uh, you know how to convert an HA pair back to a standalone appliance. So basically it's breaking up of an HA. So what you need to do is, that's very simple, just select that particular by going to grid manager, members tab, just select that appliance and then click edit and go to network, and right now it's in high availability pair option, so change it back to standalone member. So right now, as you can see, the VIP IP address 0.53 has now will be mapped to the LAN 1 interface. So now if I do a save and close, this appliance will do a restart, and after the restart is complete, we will see that the HA will be broken, and it will be a the grid master will be a standalone appliance with the IP address 192.168.0.53. So let's have a quick recap of, let's get to the slide, and let's have a quick recap of what we learned today. So first, I explained you what are the two different deployment strategies Infoblox supports, and I explained each one of them. I explained like what are the properties of standalone deployment and when do we need to use that. And I also explained what grid is, how the grid works, and how, and explained you about the grid communication part. And I also showed you how to add a member to the grid. Then I explained you the concepts of high availability. I give you an idea about about the working of an HA and how the active and the passive communicate, the active and the passive nodes of an HA pair communicates. And then I showed you how to set up an HA pair, and finally I showed you how to break an HA pair. So let's go to the UI and let's confirm if it has happened. So let's go to the grid tab, and as you can see, now the HA has been broken and it's only showing up a single appliance, that is Infoblox 1.homelab.local with an IP address 192.168.0.53. Okay, so that wraps up this video. I hope you found this video informative. If you have any queries, post it in the comment section, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.